So I have some good news and some bad news for Big 12 fans. The good news is we get an opportunity to laugh a bit at Oklahoma. The bad news is the reason that we're laughing at them is a sign of a harsh reality for, I would have said the Big 12 of the ACC, but the more I thought about it, really kind of just the rest of college football. Okay. So it's funny, but you also know, like, oh boy, in essence, this could be us, and this will be a tough thing for other schools in our conference very, very soon. This offseason, one of the highlights, one of the big moves, I think, of anybody in the Big 12 was West Virginia hiring Zach Alley, who was the co-defensive coordinator at Oklahoma, but defensive play caller. And that was a pretty fun lead up to watch that happen, right? Like, you started hearing from West Virginia country. My guy Mountaineer Paul was telling me, hey, I think this is happening. This is coming. And Oklahoma fans seem to be a little bit more in denial of that. Like, no way. Like, that's not why would he go take that position? Remember, this year, Oklahoma's problem was the offense. Like, that's still been a pretty good defense. But it happened. A guy who had worked with Rich Rod before, and West Virginia stepping up with the money to back Rich Rod to be able to go pluck a guy like that out of the SEC. So Zach Alley left and became the defensive coordinator of West Virginia. So that leaves Oklahoma with a bit of an opening, right? So the interesting part about this is not only did West Virginia make that happen, where everybody can kind of look around and be like, oh, wow, they did that. And like, Oklahoma, like, have a little chuckle there. But it also opened the door for another moment for everybody to point and laugh a bit at Oklahoma. Because with that opening, there started to be a lot of whispers about Jim Knowles, of all people, the Ohio State defensive coordinator, who was compensated very handsomely. He made $2.2 million last year. So I know you'd be like, look, I mean, Oklahoma's a good program, but like, Oklahoma certainly right now a step above. Why would the guy want to leave Ohio State to go to Oklahoma? That was the reaction when you started seeing that reported from a lot of Oklahoma. Maybe report is the wrong word, but if you're following like Oklahoma social media influencers, if you're following the sites, the fan sites, that was the word that was coming out of there, was like there was legitimate interest between Jim Knowles and Oklahoma. And for the record, they're not wrong. I don't believe that they were wrong. I do believe that some of that was happening. The problem is, it appeared Jim Knowles, for whatever reason, just really wanted to get out of Ohio State, really wanted to get out of Columbus while he was in the process of winning a national championship there while being paid $2.2 million a year. Not bad. He flirted with Notre Dame. He flirted with Oklahoma. He also flirted with Penn State. And as we all now know, he did not take the Oklahoma job, despite how confident some Oklahoma fans were about it on social media. I thought about bringing it up, putting some of them on blast here, poking fun at those, but trying to be a bit of a nicer guy, so I'm not going to do that. But just know there were some very confident Oklahoma fans on social media, and I saw Oklahoma State fans. I saw some of my poke brethren out there pulling the receipts out. Which, hey, I don't mind that at all. Totally get it. He chose Penn State. So, first of all, it reminded me of the Lincoln Riley quote when he was sitting at the podium getting asked about the LSU job in his final days at Oklahoma, and said, like, I'm not going to be the head coach at LSU. And then like 2 days later took the job at USC. Kind of like that, right? Like, Jim Knowles wouldn't take the Oklahoma job. Are you crazy? Of course he wouldn't. Well, he didn't. He didn't leave Ohio State for Oklahoma. He did leave Ohio State for Penn State. So another situation where Oklahoma gets a bit jilted by a coaching hire. And we're being honest, Sooners, if you're being honest with yourselves, this has to be at least a little bit of like who am I? Like existential crisis moment for the program, right? I mean, you went 6-7 in your first year in the SEC. Venables has now done that 2 times in 3 years. You didn't win the Big 12 the last couple of years. You were in the conference. Now you got a co-defensive coordinator being poached by West Virginia. You can talk yourself into like, all right, total control, full defensive coordinator job. It's not a complete lateral move to go to the Big 12, but like, I don't know. That's one I know is giving you doubts deep down, regardless of whether or not you say it. And this one too, like, man, Penn State, really? Like, the guy was actually going to leave, but he chose Penn State over us. Like, ugh, that hurts a little bit. That hurts a little bit. It stings. It stings. So I wouldn't blame you if you're a Big 12 fan and you're going to have a little fun at Oklahoma's expense over this whole deal. But there is a harsh reality here. And that is the dollar figure that Penn State is shelling out to bring this guy to their school. Jim Knowles got a deal that is 3 years for just over $9 million. Jim Knowles is going to be paid $3.1 million per year to be the defensive coordinator at Penn State. That's a lot of money. That is a lot of money. It set the market now on coordinators. Wink Martindale at Michigan was getting paid $2.75 million. This is now your highest paid assistant in college football, not defensive assistant in college football. And it's raising the bar. It's pushing those salaries higher. And that is the bad news for everybody else. And that's where I'm like, I don't even know that Power 2 schools are looking around like, God, they got to be thinking like, man, we've got revenue sharing now. They're talking about, hey, there was the Ross Dellinger report where he quoted somebody from an SEC collective that was basically like, yeah, you'll have to give, $14 or $15 million through revenue sharing and an extra $3 to $7 million on top of that if you want to be competitive at the top of the sport. So we're talking about, ballpark $20 million for the football program for that. And now, like, God, we got to pay $3 million for a defensive coordinator. I mean, like 10 years ago, that was like the going rate for a head coach. Like, this is great perspective. Like, if you're a Big 12 fan looking around, like, what does this mean for us? You guys know Brent Brennan, right? The head coach at Arizona. Brent Brennan was paid $3.1 million this year to be Arizona's head coach. Jim Knowles will be paid $3.1 million next year to be Penn State's defensive coordinator. So that's the reality that we're living in. It's getting more expensive, and it also just is like one of those, man, it's going to be hard to keep coordinators. The Big 12 has done a great job in holding on to head coaches so far. There has not been a ton of that. Now, I know Brent Brennan is an example of one instance where the Big 12 did not hang on to a head coach, with Jed Fish leaving right before Arizona hit the conference. But in other instances, your Chris Kleiman, Lance Leipold, Matt Campbell's of the world, they have stuck around. So that is good. But coordinators, it's been a bit different. Last year, for instance, 2 examples that you can already, I think, point to right away that hurt the league. Colin Klein left K-State to go to Texas A&M. Andy Kotelnicki left Kansas to go to Penn State. And both teams had at least somewhat disappointing seasons. Like K-State won 9 games. I can just hear Chris Kleiman's press conferences toward the end of the season where he was getting frustrated with anybody that would suggest that was really that disappointing of a season. But if we're being honest, relative to preseason expectations, an 8-4 regular season, especially after a 7-1 start, it was a bit disappointing. And they had massive problems in a game at Houston with the offense. I think that they would have gone off with Colin Klein as the OC. And Kansas, the whole narrative of their season when they were struggling early was everybody wanted to run Jeff Grimes out of town, and there was frustration with the offensive coordinator. Now, how much of that is Jalen Daniels versus Grimes? It can be debated. But I think it's very clear that the Big 12 was hurt by losing those coordinators. It will get more difficult when you have a star coordinator to keep him around if the going rate is going to start being $3.1 million at these top schools. I mean, hell, Jim Knowles is the guy that we're talking about here. Where was he at before Ohio State? He was at Oklahoma State. He was with Mike Gundy. And now what's happened to Oklahoma State's program the last couple of years? They're already having to make coordinator changes again. So this is the harsh reality for everybody here. And Penn State, man, I mean, they're just going all in. They're trying to do basically what Ohio State did last year, which is hire like Chip Kelly, pluck a bunch of huge players out of the portal and just spend. They've done a lot of spending to just keep their guys around and out of the NFL. But Penn State also, they upped the salary of Anthony Poindexter, who's the co-defensive coordinator. They convinced him to stay for one. with Knowles coming in, and then 2, gave him a nice pay increase too. I did not see a specific reported number for that. But so it's not just that you're paying $3.1 million now to get your DC in there, but you're having to pay extra money too, I'd imagine, a healthy 6-figure raise to your co-defensive coordinator to keep him around as well. So like that's the level of resource that it is going to take. And that's in addition to revenue sharing and NIL and everything that is happening. So it's the arms race does not appear to be slowing down in any shape, fashion, or form. Not that that's really a surprise to anybody, I'm sure. But just making sure that that gets raised, that fact gets raised, because that is, I think, of interest to everybody else across the sport.